Okay, if people are watching this, that the internet connection didn't work for the first half hour. So I'm sorry you missed that. You could look at the lecture from about this from 2024, although you, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll send an email about it. Yes.
Too much more time on the subject, but when I was reading this, I was reminded of like similar arguments about infinite space. I think one of them was attributed to Archimedes, some Greek. I don't remember which Greek.
Probably Archimedes.
Yeah, but basically the idea that the conception of limited space is absurd for that reason. If it was at the edge of space, I could put my hand further because if I touch something, there would be some body there in my way, so there would be something past that limit. And I was wondering, is Locke making the same argument for infinite space, or was I misreading that?
So like I mean, I'm interested in that. I believe that it's if you say it's Archimedes, I believe that that's something Archimedes probably says, but I'm not myself familiar with it. But I'm not surprised that this is the first time someone made this argument. I mean, I think I even thought about it, think about someone I know before Locke, like between Archimedes and Locke, who makes basically the same argument. I think that, it regarded as an argument that space is as a whole is not finite. It's the same argument, but it's in a different context here because Locke is trying to talk about what idea of infinity we have and where we get it. So, and he's saying that this is all we mean by infinity, right? That like nothing would stop you from going farther, from adding another one. And therefore, if you say, and I don't, about Archimedes, I'm not sure, but I think Locke is right that many of his predecessors would say exactly this, that I have an idea of space as infinite. Like that is infinite as an amount. How much space is there? Infinitely much. That Locke would say that doesn't make any sense. Because what that would mean is that you finish adding all the things. But the whole point, the whole idea of infinity is that you can't finish it. So it's a contradiction, right? And he says, right? He says, if someone comes to me and claims to have this positive idea of space infinite, I'll just ask him one question: can you add something to it or not? And if and he says either way, they'll be in trouble, right? Like if they say you can't add anything to it, then it's so okay, so it's reached a limit, so it's not infinite. But if you say you can add something to it, then obviously there was more, so it's not infinite, right? Yeah, like, and this is not the time or probably to talk about how post-Cantor, we think about infinity and whether that's a contradiction to this or whether they're talking about the same thing or not or whatever. But anyway, that's the issue that comes up here. Okay, was someone else have another? I thought someone. No. Okay. All right. All right. So I'm going to go on to substances and mixed modes. Right. So actually, like if this recording continues to the end of the lecture and someone is watching it, like it's actually now that I'm starting to talk about the material from the reading for today. So it's kind of perfect. Right. So remember that there's three types of complex ideas. Modes. I mean, sometimes Locke says modes, substances, and relations. Or sometimes he says ideas of modes, ideas of substances, and ideas of relations. And, I'm not sure if there's a good reason. I think most often he does it this way, but I don't know if there's a good reason for it. But anyway, right? And then these divide into simple modes and mixed modes. But it makes sense to talk about both of these together because according to Locke, both of these kind of ideas involve a combination of a lot of different simple ideas. It's just, that's totally illegible, but that's known. All right. And so at least in theory, I think, although I'm going to talk about why this isn't the way it usually works out, but at least in theory, I think you could take the same collection of simple ideas or collection of complex ideas, right? Locke often uses this, talks about, well, not often, but sometimes, every once in a while, talks about compounding and decompounding. And you might think decompounding like means taking apart or something, but actually this is a term, I think it's like a term from alchemy or something, but decompounding means compounding again, like compounding compounds with each other. So, right, this is like the D in like deliberate or describe or, yeah, I mean, it's not all right. So anyway, so you can take the same collection of ideas and make it both into a mixed mode and the idea of a substance. So the difference, the root difference is not supposed to be what type of ideas make them up, or how many there are, or how they're related to each other, but rather the way the combination is referred to an external object. Um, um, so the origin of the idea of an idea of substance, Locke says, and this is book 2, chapter 23, section 1 on page 268. The mind being, as I have declared, furnished with a great number of the simple ideas conveyed in by the senses as they are found in exterior things. See, right there, he said, when he says simple ideas conveyed in by the senses as they are found in exterior things, he's using idea to refer to also to the quality in the object. And again, this is a type of confusion he warns you he's gonna engage in, but it's still kind of annoying. Right. So, but in any case, the mind being, as I have declared, furnished with a great number of the simple ideas conveyed in by the senses as they are found in exterior things, or by reflection on its own operations, takes notice also that a certain number of these simple ideas go constantly together. So the origin of the idea of substance is that, and again, at least this holds for the like legitimate or useful or like good ideas of substance. They start with me actually getting some combination of simple ideas at the same time, right? So like the idea of gold, which is an example of an idea of substance, or the idea of horse, which is an example of an idea of substance. like, how did we first form those ideas? Well, someone encountered something that was heavy and yellow um, and then also had certain powers, which, as Locke says, he's going to count for these purposes as more simple ideas, right? Like it's fusible, which means you can melt it. It's fixed, which means it's not consumed by the fire. That is, it has a very high evaporation point, basically. It's soluble in aqua regia, which aqua regia is it's a combination of nitric acid and hydrochloric acid. Anyway, it's some kind of combination of acids that gold is soluble in. So someone actually came across something with those properties. And then that's why they decided to put, and not just once, but constantly, as he says, right? Found that those simple ideas constantly come in together. And that's how they decided to form an idea of substance. Now, I mean, there's kind of two explanations of how that results in a special kind of idea. So the first one, I think, well, is at least in this book, the one that Locke most often mentions. And I think the first one is related to the idea of substance in general. So, and it's at the end of section 1. Because, as I have said, not imagining how these simple ideas can subsist by themselves, right? And there, it's super important to understand that by these simple ideas, he actually means the qualities corresponding to them, right? So, like, here's the quality of yellowness, and here's the quality of heaviness, and here's the quality of what other qualities does gold have? Shininess or something, right? So, like, oh, that's not really a simple idea. What? You see, malleable is a power already. That's, you can see why.
Solid.
Yeah, solid, and everybody includes the idea of, right. So we have these qualities: yellowness, heaviness, solidity, and each one of them, heaviness maybe also is not really a simple idea, but okay, never mind. I mean, I think that's why Locke, relaxes the rules here and says we're going to count powers as simple ideas. Because powers are very similar types of things, right? I mean, it's just in relation to some object other than me, at least as far as active powers go. Right. So again, when you're calling these the simple ideas, the powers are almost the same thing. Strictly speaking, these are the simple ideas. And we only know about the powers because they change some other body, and other body has an effect on us that could, So anyway, so when he says, not imagining how these simple ideas can exist by themselves, what word does he use there? Can subsist by themselves. We can't understand how there can be a power of nothing. So because of, as I have said, not imagining how these simple ideas can subsist by themselves, we accustom ourselves to suppose some substratum wherein they do subsist. Right? Suppose, I mean, I'm not completely sure about this, but I think he's using this in a kind of technical sense. Right, this is suppose, right? We suppose a substratum means that in thought we put something under these qualities to hold them up, so to speak. But obviously that's a metaphor. right? Um, and as Locke well knows, that's part of his point here. It's an obscure metaphor. Like, what about this relationship is like one thing holding another thing up? Uh, um, so anyway, like, I think this is how we get the general idea of substance, right? That whatever qualities there are, there has to be something holding them up. And, this is also like tacit etymology of the word substance. I guess it's not just tacit, he actually says this in the text, right? The word substance, he says, means like supporting something from below or something like that. Now, like, this is not the true historical origin of like why substantia is used to mean this in Latin, but um, uh, but it, because it was actually used, it was introduced into Latin as a translation of a Greek word, and the Greek word doesn't mean standing under or anything like that. Um, but the Latin word was used for a long time, and so like anyone who did philosophy in Latin started to think of it as meaning this. So in that sense, maybe Locke isn't wrong. But he would be wrong if he thought that Greek and Arabic philosophy was working with that metaphor, because they don't use words that mean that. But okay, in any case, I mean, but they do use other words like subject, hupokemenon. That does mean like lying under. And it is true, according to Aristotle, that everything that's not a substance must exist in a subject, which at least ultimately has to be a substance. Right. So it's maybe I shouldn't have said anything about this. In other words, it's kind of a footnote that I think is really interesting, but it probably doesn't affect Locke's point here. So right, so Locke is saying that we suppose we in thought put something under all qualities, and we call that substance, but we have no clear positive idea of it. That is, we don't know what it is that stands under qualities in general. We don't even know what this standing under relation is. We just know, I think, something like there must be something without which these powers couldn't subsist, namely what has the power. And sometimes it sounds like Locke is thinking, and so this is just a big mistake, and we should stop thinking that. I mean, sometimes it really sounds like he means that, but other times he uses himself apparently really seriously, right? Like in the section about freedom, which even though it comes first in the book, I'm putting it off to the end of this lecture, partly for this reason, that he, in the section of freedom, he says that the will is a power. It's the power to do or forbear what I prefer. So the will doesn't do things. I do things. I can do things because I have this power, right? So he says, what does it is the mind. That is the substance. And he uses it in other places too. So I think ultimately his feeling is that although this idea is defective, we can't get along without it. That it's true that we can't think of powers as powers of nothing. So that's one way of saying like what the special relationship of ideas in the simple ideas and the idea of a substance is. That along with the simple ideas, I put under them or that is, I put under the qualities of which they are the ideas, a subject, a substance in which they inhere. Whereas in a mixed mode, I just, not that I think that if these, I mean, of course, I still think that if something caused all these ideas together, there would have to be a substance there. But in the idea of the mixed mode, that's not included. I'm just focusing on the qualities, basically. Now, what does that have to do, though, with the fact that ideas of substance, unlike in general ideas of mixed modes, are taken from or should be taken from things that constantly go together, right? That is, are taken from experience rather than just invented. So I think to understand that, you have to understand this other thing that Locke says about why we suppose a substance, or maybe it's not a different explanation of why, but it's a different explanation of what it involves to suppose a substance. So this one place this comes up, I mean, it's going to be much clearer when we get to book 4 and he talks about knowledge of substances, but it's already fairly clear here. So this is section 6 of chapter 23 on page 270. Um, uh, oh, okay. Oh, yeah, okay, I just was missing it. Whatever therefore be the secret and abstract nature of substance in general, all the ideas we have of particular distinct sorts of substances are nothing but several combinations of simple ideas coexisting in such, though unknown, cause of their union as makes the whole subsist of itself. So it's not just that the substance enables them to be some qualities or other here. The substance is, a substance of a particular sort is conceived of as the cause of the union of these qualities. Right? These qualities come together because of what sort of substance they adhere to. So the idea of a sort of substance is the idea of an idea, it's a combination of ideas which I think come in together because there's some one external thing that causes them to be together. Right? So like when I have the idea of gold, it's not just that there's yellowness and heaviness and whatever happen to be supported here, but it's that there's something here, gold itself, the substance gold, that causes all those qualities to come together. And that's why they constantly come together, because I keep finding new instances of this same substance. So in other words, the idea, what goes on between the ideas in the idea of a sort of substance is that I conceive of them as having some necessary relation to each other. It's not one of those visible necessary relations that I can collect just from perceiving the ideas. Rather, I suppose that it's outside of me somewhere. That this necessary connection is established by something outside of me. As an explanation for why these ideas constantly go together, and also as the basis for prediction, right? So next time I find something that's heavy and yellow and solid and shiny and malleable and fusible and whatever, I'm going to say, I bet this is gold. If it is, it will definitely also be soluble in aqua regia. Right, so this is the idea of a sort of substance is an idea of necessary connection or nexus between the qualities that cause some ideas that always go together, and it potentially forms the basis for predicting the future if I assume that the future is like the past. Right? So like Hume's examples are going to be just like this. That's why I'm drawing a special attention to this point. Right? He's going to say like his examples in the first inquiry about like what we call the problem of induction have a form like, just because bread was nourishing, has always been nourishing up until now, how do I know that it will be nourishing in the future, right? And then what that means, as Hume says explicitly, is I find something that looks and smells, etc., just like bread, but I haven't tried whether it's nourishing yet. Why do I think that it also has that other power of nourishing? And the answer is because I think there's some necessary connection between these ideas established by the substance outside of me. And then, of course, Hume is going to say, don't know that, etc. All right. Right, that's about ideas of substances as opposed to mixed modes. Are there questions about ideas of substances? No. Yes.
Well, sometimes when I'm reading Locke, I get kind of unsure as to whether he's proposing this as something to knock down, like when he's talking about substance as like a real thing. Because it seems like if he was being, from my perspective, he was being more consistent, it would be that you've got this idea of substance and you don't have the experience of the substance, and you wouldn't have the knowledge of the substance until the knowledge comes from experience. So I'm just wondering, like, is it just, do you recognize him thinking of substance as something that really exists outside of us, in him consistently referring to it as such? Because so far he hasn't really come out and like explicated one way or the other.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is what I was saying before, that sometimes it does sound like he's saying, yeah, this idea is just nonsense and we should get rid of it. But other times, and again, I think when we get to book 4, this will become clearer. It seems obvious that Locke thinks we need this. We really do need this idea. We can't conceive of these qualities subsisting on their own. So, and yet but we should keep in mind how defective it is, right? And yeah, I'm honestly, I tend toward thinking that it's the latter is what he really thinks, and that those other things are not, where it sounds like he's trying to tell you to get rid of the idea. He's just trying to drive home like how defective an idea it is, how confused and unclear and whatever it is, and merely relative and so forth. But yeah, I mean, if someone wanted to interpret it the other way, I think that would definitely be possible. So, I mean, this is like, philosophical texts are hard to understand. They're really hard to understand. And they're, you have to balance different things against each other. And it's also possible just to say, well, Locke is totally inconsistent. And I know some people think that about Locke. I mean, I do feel like there are places where I can't make what he says in one place go together with what he says in another place. And I feel like, yeah, maybe he just doesn't notice or something, but I don't think it's on a scale of that he just never says one thing without, also saying the opposite somewhere else or whatever. And in this particular case, I feel like he probably means one coherent thing, but it's just hard to figure out which it is. But again, if someone wants to argue the opposite, it would be hard to refute anyway. I mean, I think it's true that Locke thinks, and this, he'll say this when we get to book 4, that we have very little knowledge about substances. But remember, he thinks we have rational states of belief that don't rise to the level of knowledge. Right? So in other words, he thinks, I believe he thinks that we can form probable, right? We can judge with probability that there's such a thing as gold and it has these properties, but we can't know it because we can't see these necessary connections. And perhaps only in the case, there's perhaps only one sort of substance that we do have knowledge of, and that's body. I don't know if Locke explicitly gives that as an exception anywhere, but it seems to follow from what he says. Even remember the passage I quoted about this to begin with was from book 4, and he's in the process of talking precisely about why we don't have knowledge of substances. And he says, except for some few of the primary qualities, we don't see any necessary connection between our ideas, right? So it seems like in the case of body, he thinks we could have some knowledge because we do see the necessary connection between the ideas. And that would explain how we could have knowledge of physics, even if we can't have knowledge of chemistry, let's say. Right? That is, we can know the general properties of bodies and how they cause each other to move and so forth. But we can only ever have probable judgments about how many different kinds of minerals there are and stuff like that. Okay. That's probably more than I should have said about that right now. Carl, did you have, no, you're done? Okay. All right. So in mixed modes, on the other hand, so this is chapter 22. So again, I'm going backwards here, but it seems to me easier to understand what mixed modes aren't. Section book 2, chapter 22, section 1 on page 262. These mixed modes being also such combinations of simple ideas as are not looked upon to be the characteristical marks of any real beings that have a steady existence, but scattered and independent ideas put together by the mind, are thereby distinguished from the complex ideas of substances. Right? So he's saying that in the case of substances, we form the idea, or at least we try to, or when we're being responsible, we form the idea of a substance by getting it from the ideas that actually come in constantly together. But in the case of mixed modes, there's no such attempt at responsibility. Right? It's just, it can be totally scattered ideas. We may have seen them together sometime. Maybe that's even how we got the idea, but the idea itself doesn't claim anything about that. Right? They're not looked upon. Maybe they even are, but they're not looked upon to be characteristical marks of any real beings that have a steady essence. Right? And that, I think that not looked upon is what allows, in theory, the possibility they talked about to begin with. You could put the same ideas that you have in your idea of gold together, but not look at them as necessarily going together. And you would have the idea of goldishness, so to speak. Right? That would be the corresponding mixed mode. I think Locke's point is that in the case of something that we take to be a natural kind, that mixed mode is pointless. Right? Like when we're studying nature, what we want to find is the combinations of the ideas that actually go together because of the way things are. But we could do that. And maybe it's even not bad to do that if we're writing a story about unicorns. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what Locke thinks about stories like that. He's not, as we'll see, he's not so necessarily so positive about poetry and fiction. But in any case, for the most part, in the more serious use, we wouldn't do that. Whereas in the case of mixed mode, so what is the, right, and the only limit in the case of mixed modes, Locke says, is, this is in section 2, further down the same page. To form such ideas, it sufficed that the mind puts the parts of them together and that they were consistent in the understanding without considering whether they had any real being, right? So we just have to make sure to put ideas together in a way that's not internally inconsistent. This is the difference between what Kant calls formal validity and material or transcendental validity. But anyway, never. Right. So, so to put it differently, in the case of mixed modes, I mean, this is kind of, to use a little piece of Kantian terminology again, this is kind of a difference between autonomy and heteronomy. Yeah, I mean, not strictly speaking, that is, every complex idea, according to Locke, is this, at least this is what I was arguing last time, or was it the time before? No, it was last time, I think, that every complex idea is a voluntary product of the mind. And that's even a prerequisite for abstraction. That, like, and I think maybe even voluntary isn't the right word. Thinking about the reading for this time, maybe you should say it's free. The mind is free in the production of complex ideas in the sense that it has the power to compound or forbear compounding. However, like, what's happening here in the case of ideas of substance is that although these are ideas I'm freely putting together, I'm trying to do it in a way that tracks what this external thing requires. So I'm trying to use my freedom to track someone else's principle. Whereas in the case of mixed modes, there is no principle outside of myself that I'm following. I'm collecting them together for my own purposes. Yeah.
Does it be like how tree-like you think a tree is? Does that make any sense?
What is like
How
how?
like you see a tree, like, oh, this is very tree-like or not very tree.
And you're saying that would be an example of mixed mode if you form the idea of tree-likeness?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I suspect Locke would think that that doesn't make sense or has to be reinterpreted. Yeah. I mean, whereas other people like Hegel think that's the key to understanding the concept of living things, right? That they have like a nature that they can fall short of and so forth, right? But I think Locke would probably think, look, it either exhibits the qualities of a tree and then it's a tree, or it doesn't, and then it's not a tree. But and that, yeah, what you really mean is you've set up a relative idea and you're measuring this. I don't know, but anyway, yeah. So if there were idea of tree likeness, that would be a mixed mode. But and it could be they would find that no trees are tree-like. They all fail, right? And again, that's an example of why that kind of idea, generally speaking, according to Locke at least, isn't useful in the study of nature, right? I don't want to form ideas of sorts of external objects in such a way that, for all I know, nothing belongs to this sort. What's the use of that? Right, or as he put it before, unless we have a mind to fill our head with chimeras, and right. So, but okay, so getting back to mixed modes, so when is this useful? Well, I was saying, like, this means that we put the ideas together for our own purposes. And ultimately, at least that ought to mean we put them together for our moral purposes. Right? Like we have a use for this idea, but it should be a morally permitted use. Or else God will punish us in the afterlife or something. But anyway, so I think this explains why, even though, again, nothing about the formal definition of the difference between ideas of substance and mixed modes requires this. The examples of ideas of substance are almost always natural sorts in Locke. And the examples of mixed modes are largely ethical and political. Right, so like in chapter 22, section 1, the examples are obligation, drunkenness, and a lie. And in the examples later on page 262, he mentions hypocrisy. On page 263, he mentions sacrilege and murder. We put ideas together to signify the way things should be or shouldn't be. And therefore, we don't care if anything actually is that way or not. Right? The purpose is not speculative, but practical. The purpose isn't to understand what's out there, but the point, however, is to change it, as Marx says, right? So like, if there is something out there as murder, that's actually bad. We want to stop it. That's what we formed the idea for. But Locke also mentions that in the case of political institutions at their origin, someone must have formed a lot of ideas that didn't correspond to anything yet. Right? Imagine people kind of coming together to form the first social contract. And at this point, at least, Locke's political philosophy and the philosophy in this book work together pretty well. Imagine people coming together to form the first commonwealth. There never has been a commonwealth before. They have to first form the idea of it and then say, let's do this. And also, similarly, Locke mentions artificial things sometimes in this context, which I guess he agrees are not substances. I think they're not substances. Maybe I shouldn't get lost in this rabbit hole. They're not substances when regarded as such. That is, the properties the table have is not because of the unknown qua table, is not because of the unknown action of the underlying substance, but because we put together pieces we already knew the properties of in a certain way. And so we understand exactly why it has those qualities. If you just consider it as a table, right? Once you consider it as a body again, then it becomes just as mysterious as it was before. All right. The examples of simple modes, a lot of them are mathematical, but not all of them. And so I don't know exactly what to say that's going on. But all right, so that's all I have to say about substances and mixed modes for now. I mean, they'll come back when we talk about the names of substances and mixed modes and knowledge of substances and mixed modes. But that's all I have to say about it for now. And I want to get on to relation. And there's only 10 minutes left to talk about relation and freedom. I guess I'll get to freedom next time. I think this happens every year. But I hope that by having 2 lectures at the beginning instead of 1, well, anyway, I'm wasting time again. Okay, so what are relations? This is what Locke says at the beginning of chapter 25 on page 288. Denominations given to positive things, intimating that respect Well, maybe I should start. This is relation and respect, and the denominations given to positive things intimating that respect and serving as marks to lead thoughts beyond the subject itself denominated to something distinct from it are what we call relatives, and the things so brought together related. Right, so his whole discussion of this is, and I left he actually says at the beginning of that sentence, I left this part out, but his whole discussion of this in that section involves a kind of, and in this case, I guess, completely accurate, like analysis of the words relation and respect, right? That is when he says that the mind, so to speak, carries an idea beyond itself. So that's what this part means carried. Right, the Latin word infinitive, present infinitive, this Latin word to carry, but it's an extremely irregular verb, and this is its past participle. So, right, we get both reference and relation from the same verb. Right, and as for respect, like this part, this like spectio means looking. Right, so that's why he also says, actually what he says at the very beginning is, besides the ideas, whether simple or complex, that the mind has of things as they are in themselves, there are others it gets from their comparison to one another. The understanding and the consideration of anything is not confined to that precise object. It can carry any idea as it were beyond itself, or at least look beyond it, right? So the carry beyond is relation and the look beyond is respect. Okay, so it follows from this explanation of how we form ideas of relation, that a relation is always between two things. That's actually the title of section 6 of chapter 25. Relation only betwixt two things. Right, so there's always two things. There's the thing that's going to be denominated from the relation, and there's the other thing that the mind carries it beyond itself towards, or looks beyond it towards. This is where all the problem about the relation of identity starts. Because identity is supposed to be a relation between something and itself, and only between something and itself. Right? So if the mind carries this beyond itself to something else, this relation is not identity. So what is it? Does the mind kind of carry the idea out of itself and back to itself? This is Hegel, but this is not Locke. Right? Locke doesn't think that makes any sense, or it probably doesn't even occur to him. Does it occur to him? It's a good question. He's read Neoplatonism or whatever, wouldn't it occur to him? I don't know. Anyway, if it occurs to him, he doesn't like that. So that's why basically there's this whole chapter about identity, trying to explain what identity is. But I think I'm going to talk about that next time. Well, I guess I'll at least give the initial answer there. So this is section 1 of book 2, chapter 27 on page 296. When we see anything to be in any place, in any instant of time, oh no, that's the wrong place. Another occasion the mind often takes of comparing is the very being of things when considering anything as existing at any determined time and, oh, sorry, considering anything as existing at any determined time and place. I don't want to try to explain what the very being of things means there. I mean, it has to do with what I said about existence, always being existence in a time and place. Okay, but never mind. So when considering anything as existing at any determined time and place, we compare it with itself existing at another time and thereon form the ideas of identity and diversity, right? So the general solution to this is going to be that identity is always identity between something at one time. So let's say this is time and this is space. It's always going to be the identity between, it's always going to be a relation between something at one time and something at another time. And it's gonna consist in saying this at this time is the same thing as this was at this time. So that's why there's, so to speak, two things, but we're identifying them with each other. And then what makes this interesting is that it turns out that there's different ways of doing this. Right? That if I ask, is this the same mass of matter that this was? The answer may be yes. But if the question is this the same oak tree that this was? The answer may be no. Right? Because the mass of matter that made the oak sapling at this time has been scattered all over the place. And meanwhile, a completely different mass of matter, not even the same size and shape, is the same oak tree. Right. So, and like that's the preface then to Locke talking about personal identity. That is what makes something the same person at one time as they were at a different time. But like I said, I think I'm going to talk about that next time. In this case, it's not just leaving it over. I mean, discussing freedom, personal identity, and moral good, which is going to be part of the reading for next time. Those things all go together in Locke. So it's good to discuss them together. But so what I do want to say right now is I want to mention right now is Locke's analysis of why we sometimes take something that's relative. We take it to be, and the opposite of relative. So usually the opposite of relative is absolute. And sometimes Locke does use absolute for the opposite of relative. But usually, more often, he uses positive as the opposite of relative, which is bad because positive is also the opposite of negative, among other reasons. It's a little bit confusing, but usually you can tell from the context, right? So why is it that we take something to be positive when it's, or absolute when it's actually relative? And he says, well, there's two cases. One is external denomination. Now, what external denomination means, and this is, Locke isn't making this up. In fact, he's criticizing it. It's a traditional concept. External denomination means that something has a property, and it's really a property of that thing. It's not a relation, but it only has it by virtue of something else. So you might say something like rich. You know, to be rich is a property of a person, but they only have it by virtue of their wealth that they own. Take that away, and you don't have to change them at all, and now they're not rich. So Locke says this is really just a relation where you're not focused on what the other term of the relation is. It's not different from a relation like father or whiter than, right? Where everyone is clear that this thing is being denominated because of its relation to something else. Locke says it's the same as that. And moreover, I mean, I think maybe he could have given this example. The examples he gives seem to have kind of a political point. Right? Like one example he gives is concubine. Another example he gives is general. He says that, like, unlike in the case of wife, where there's a correlative term, husband. I mean, of course, for us, this isn't so straightforward, but Locke is assuming a wife is always the wife of a husband, right? So, unlike in the case of wife, where there's a correlative term husband, and vice versa, in the case of concubine, there is no correlative term, right? There's no word for someone who has a concubine. And similarly, in the case of general, there's no word for the people commanded by a general. I mean, maybe there is an American military organization or something, but anyway, Locke says there isn't a word for all the people combined. He's probably thinking of Roman generals, actually. So anyway, there's no word for all the people commanded by a general. And he says, therefore, we tend to like ignore the relativity of this and think it's an absolute property. And in both of these cases, I think you can see, I think he also gives dictators. There he's definitely thinking of Roman dictators as an example, right? Like there you can definitely see why it would be to someone's advantage to distract you from the, right? Another example that Locke doesn't give along the same lines might be prostitute. Right, so, and rich also could be, right? Like it's the advantage of the rich for you to forget that they wouldn't be rich anymore if you just disrupted their relation to this other stuff. All right, I was going to talk about the other one, which is tacit relation, but that one's actually kind of boring, so it's just as well to stop yet. All right, I'll see you next week.